Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics.
All right, we're here with Dr. Lindsay Tedds from the University of Calgary, and we're going to talk about the budget because that came out this week and it was very different than most people expected. One of the things, though, that caught my attention in the lead up was everyone was so concerned that this was going to be hugely expansionary in terms of fiscal policy, and it really wasn't. But there seems to be a disconnect in the way we're talking about the investments the government wants to make in social safety net versus whether that's considered expansionary or not. And Lindsay, I thought you would be a good person to help talk about this the way we're thinking about these concepts.
If you want a unique perspective on fiscal policy, I'm your gal.
So yeah, let's start with this concept of what we're considering to be expansionary and whether safety the social safety net should be considered in that.
Yeah. So normally when we think about when you think about recessions, right, and you think about a government coming in with policies to help stimulate the economy out of that recession, what we're talking about is the federal government coming into areas where businesses are normally active, that investment has gone away, and that's sort of what's driving the recession. And so then that expansionary fiscal policy is the federal government moving into that space and to take over where the business community is not at that time. Right. And then as we recover, we want the federal government to move out of that space so it doesn't crowd out business investment. But when you're talking about social policy, which social policy is economic policy, this is one that a lot of people really struggle with. But when you're talking about space like pharmacare and dental care, the government is talking about moving into a space that is not being served by the private sector. And so we're not looking at a crowd out. None of the programs here that they've talking about are actually talking about replacing all of the existing programs. These programs are gap fillers. Mm-hmm. And I think we really need to be careful about understanding what we think about as expansionary fiscal policy versus spending, which may not have that same inflationary boom. And in fact, some of these programs are going to help people move into more permanent work as well as higher quality work, because it's going to allow them to transition off of provincial income supports. One of the biggest barriers to people moving off of provincial income supports is actually not the clawback of the benefit because they're working more. It's because they immediately lose health benefits, which is dental care for their kids and pharmacare and these sorts of things. That's the big welfare wall. So I think this is great, although we don't have the implementation details, but you know, that's kind of the perspective of it.
Right. And this is something that you found when you were doing your basic income panel in BC, was that this is one of those barriers that kind of stops people from moving into employment.
It's the biggest barrier. It's not losing the benefits when you go to work. It's losing these health supports. I think we focus way too much on, you know, that income wall and not enough on these social supports. And so big part of our report, now BC's a little different because it does already have fair pharmacare for individuals up to about I can't remember if it's 90,000 or 120,000. And we had recommended pulling dental out of the income assistance and putting it into a model just like fair pharmacare, so that we can take down that welfare wall.
Okay, and that's interesting to get that perspective, because yeah, we hear about welfare walls in terms of income, but not necessarily in terms of benefits. So I think that's some good perspective to have. The other thing that we have seen now since you and I last spoke was we now have the national childcare fully implemented across the country. And tell me a little more about what you think this is going to, what the effect is going to be economically now that We've got all of the provinces and territories signed on.
But we got them signed on. There are some growing pains, and those are not unexpected, because moving into the space of reducing fees, expanding spaces, getting more people trained, increasing their wages, it doesn't happen like that. And yet parents really want it to happen like that. And there are some adjustment issues, like the subsidy to reduce the wages goes to licensed care. Unlicensed care is not part of that. And that is part of the focus on quality. So some unlicensed providers are trying to get licensed to keep those spaces, but the parents are on wait lists for the subsidized spaces, so they're hurting. And some unlicensed providers are choosing to drop out of the market. So we actually have some contractions in spaces. This is an unfortunate part of the rolling out of it. So short term, there's just a lot of adjustments going on, but longer term in certain provinces, we should be seeing, especially in Ontario, although they've been the laggards coming in. But when we look at provinces like Alberta and Ontario that had absolutely nothing there for the majority of parents, we should actually be seeing some pretty big impacts over the next couple of years. So, patience, and it's messy.
Oh, for sure. And this is always one of these things as well, where implementation matters. And so it's going to take time and so on to get it right. One of the other things I want to touch on with you is with the budget, the government put out this huge document to go with it about its gender-based plus analysis, or GBA plus. Which is something I have looked at in my columns for Extra when it comes to looking at how the government is seeing LGBTQ issues. But you also had some commentary on how the government is doing their GBA plus analysis. So I wanted you just to give me some of your thoughts there as well.
So, I mean, the government's been paddling in this space for a while, right? We have the gender results framework. We've got this GBA plus, but when you actually look at the analysis, they're not increasing their sophistication of it. The idea of GBA plus is supposed to be an intersectional lens, and intersectionality means understanding that identity, who we are, is not static. And it also interacts with the world and our institutions. What the government does in its GBA analysis is still pretty entry-level analysis, because it takes these individual identities and just does some basic statistics and talks about that one program. They don't actually do any of the analysis to think about how does this interact with other programs we've put in place, and how does this dismantle issues related to power and privilege and institution. And that's particularly important on the analysis of anything to do with reconciliation, because power and privilege and colonialism has to be dismantled before you can actually just have a program do something. And the example I gave was that legal aid for those who need it at most. Yes, our criminal justice system is our prisons are overrepresented by people of Indigenous identity, and that is a real problem. But they don't actually link that to the fact that they're spending some money on mental health supports and more self-governance on First Nations reserves, but they've also left a big gap of urban First Nations. And so it's unsatisfying to actually addressing the problem, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely makes sense. And it's touching on all kinds of stuff that I write about in the course of my work for different outlets. So it's good perspective to have in terms of that. I guess just to round off, is there anything else that you think is particularly noteworthy in the budget now that we've seen it? I'll
say one good thing and then one sort of area of concern. I mean, While we can all want different paths to balancing the budget and paying off our debt, that doesn't detract from the idea that despite the fact they're spending this money, the federal's financial position is fiscally sustainable. There's nothing in there that shows us is not unsustainable. And I get a little tired of this. I mean, we can talk about trade-offs, but in the end, it's sustainable. We are on the path of reducing our debt to GDP ratio. That fiscal anchor always makes me think I'm drowning. I don't know why we came up with that word. But the fiscal anchor, it's looking fine. We want to make sure that we don't do anything drastic like austerity measures, because we know from the financial collapse that just makes everything worse. We're in a bit of precarious situation. We just want to make sure that we keep the foot on the gas for a little bit longer, so that we don't have we don't undo the good that we did during the pandemic.
Yeah.
On the flip side, there's nothing in there about the fiscal sustainability asymmetry. Provinces are not fiscally sustainable. There isn't a single province that is fiscally sustainable, although Alberta is doing better than most. And that is because of the aging population and the pressures on healthcare and education. And one area which we didn't really see as much movement as I think we needed was in the long-term care sector. And I think that's been quite a bit of a disappointment given everything that we learned during the pandemic. And so those are two intersecting sort of issues there in terms of the situation of the provinces.
Okay. My read of long-term care is that they're in a series of negotiations with provinces around that right now. So I'm guessing there's going to be something more on that coming in the next few months, but that would be my read of that situation.
Yeah, it's because the feds are dabbling in every provincial jurisdiction that you can imagine, right? So they got negotiations going on everywhere.
And provinces who don't want strings attached to the money that the federal government's spending. So that's one of my particular bugaboos. But all right, well, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. I very much appreciate it.
And thank you, Dan.
Again.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.